Hi, this is Claudia Filos with the Center for Atlantic Studies in Washington, D.C. I'm here today with some community members and with two wonderful scholars. And we're going to be here to talk about the epic cycle. And so I'm just so excited about the conversation we're going to have today. And I look forward to the participation of the people who are in this conference call and of our viewers who are joining us on Google+. We'll be looking at our Q&A and taking your questions at a later point in our discussion. So first, let me turn to our wonderful speakers and scholars. We're being joined today by Efimia and by Justin. And can you introduce yourselves and tell us about basically, what your main focus of your research? That would be so wonderful.
Okay. Okay. Hi. I just wanted to say that I'm so happy to be with you today, with all of you. It's been wonderful indeed, and so thank you very much for the invitation. I will just say that I come from Greece. I'm a Greek scholar, and my university is the Patras University, but right now I'm in Athens, so I'm joining you from Athens. And before Justin takes over, I think I will just say a few words about the Kikos project, if you like. Would you like that,
Yes.
Claudia? Okay.
Yes. But you know what, Effie? You know what I realized? I forgot to say your full name, Efimia Karakantza, right? Did I say that correctly?
It's okay. It's okay. It's a hard
and Justin Arft.
Well,
no, I just wanted to, because we were chatting before the call went live, so I just. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'll just throw the little rooster on your screen. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because this is our logo, and I will start. Do you like to hear a little story behind it or not?
Sure.
Okay, so the Kikos, which in Greek means the cycle, okay, it's a project which is under, the project of the CHS, of the Center for Hellenic Studies. I'm directing it for the center, okay, and it started one day when it was actually a warm summer day in ancient Olympia, when we were discussing with Gregory Nash and dear colleagues from the Harvard Summer University an idea that that time it was still very vague and we didn't know exactly what we wanted to do, but it had something to do with Olympia, with ancient Olympia, and new people or new scholars who would like to be engaged in something. Okay, that time, again, as I said, we didn't actually know what it was that. Gradually, as time progressed, we came to sort of think of a project which would involve the new generation of scholars, okay? And this is our main focus, actually. The main focus is the new generation of scholars, because we said we don't need another conference. We don't need, again, together with, the professors of various universities to talk about various things again. But we need to sort of give the floor to the new generation. And the idea of this regeneration and giving, actually, or giving the chance to new people to try their ideas academically in an environment which would be international, okay? That now is something which we think is represented by our little rooster, and this little rooster has a little story behind it. First of all, this comes from a shield from ancient Olympia, from the Museum of Ancient Olympia. So it's an emblem, okay, of a shield. And I like it very much, but I didn't know what to do with it. So, sort of, I thought that, it will stay with all my photographs in my, files. And one day when Gregory Nash actually gave his speech, I think the opening speech of Greg at the Cultural Center of the Onassis Foundation in Athens. That, I don't know whether you remember, that was a huge conference called the Athens Dialogues, okay? So Greg was sort of talking about the undying logos, the undying discourse, okay, of the Platonic dialogues. And he singled out some passages, and one of the passages actually that he talked about was one of the from Phaedo, from this Platonic dialogue, when actually just before Socrates had just drunk the cognon, okay, and he's about to die, and all his friends are around him, okay, and the last instruction actually that he gives to his friends around him is to sacrifice a rooster to Asclepios, to the god of healing. And there is a very, very curious actually sort of instruction, like, Creton, we have promised Asclepios a rooster, don't forget to do that first thing in the morning, or something like that. And the interpretation that Gregory Naja actually gave to this passage, which is a very difficult to interpret passage, and there is not unanimity among the scholars as to what it means, okay? So Greg said, okay, to me, this is the sign of the undying logos, because if you sacrifice a rooster, you wake up to the sound of another rooster next morning.
Right.
So you always have a rooster there, okay? And it's the sign of the undying discourse and the undying logos. So this is how the rooster came to represent the ever regenerated logos of our cycle, if you like. And as I said, this project is all about students and not about us, okay? And students from all over the place, from around the world, come together once a year, and they present their papers and their work on the Greek epic cycle, and there is a big discussion. And Justin actually is one of the students of this year's, of last year's project, and if he likes, he can tell you his experience about that. So, okay.
Yes.
That's all from me.
Effie, thank you so much. That was so, so beautiful. And I know that many of the themes that you're talking about here, about intergenerational research, are so very important to the center generally. So, and it's such a joy to have you here talking to us about the beautiful Kiklos program, about the ideas behind it. And it's important that we take this time before we get to your talk, okay? So, but at this point, I'd like to just briefly invite Justin Arft. He's from the University of Missouri. Maybe just to introduce himself quickly and talk about his general research interests.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I can say that the sacrifice of the rooster is efficacious, because this has been, from my participation in the Kiklos project to being a part of this very, very special community. It is an honor to have been able to develop ideas with other professionals and get feedback from scholars who I might not have been able to have discourse with otherwise, and then to be able to present those ideas to you all, it's just really, it's really neat. So yeah, as you said, I'm at the University of Missouri. I'm in my 5th and final year of a PhD program in classical studies. And I focus in oral tradition. I'm the managing editor of our journal, Oral Tradition, and unbeknownst to me, before I started the program, I was fated, I think, to study Homer. It was not my original plan. Speaking of plans, but I was inspired by John Miles Foley, who I worked with here before his untimely death, and but it's through experiences just this that I've been able to very easily branch out and reach out to a very supportive group of scholars who have been extremely helpful. And the Kiklos project and the paper I presented for that was very much part of that. And in the dialogues we've already had, you'll see how some of those ideas developed in the presentation I give after Effie. And then for full rendition, if anybody wants to see it, it will very shortly be posted on Kiklos at. So
that's so beautiful. So we'll make sure that everyone has the links to Kiklos at, which is an open source online publication at the Center for Hellenic Studies. But also, I'd just like to welcome 2 other important members who are joining us in this conversation, and they're members of your intellectual family, right, Effie? Right here with us.
Actually, I can see them sitting side by side. So I see half of the face of Marietta and another half of the face of Andreas. So either you move a bit, guys, or we see half of your face. I
So,
don't know what. Yeah.
okay, I appreciate that you took the time to talk about yourselves and about your interests, and that we introduce each other. And when the other members in our community start speaking with questions, I'll invite them to introduce themselves too, because community building is an important part of what we all do together. So, it's creating these ideas together, creating conversation together, right? We can't create that dialogue on our own. That's how we keep it alive.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so Justin, you kind of pointed towards that word plan that you used, Effie. So I just want to share with everyone. So the title of what you're going to present today to us is Within the Kyklos, Whose Plan Is This? Divine Plans and Poetic Narrative in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Do you want to sort of take us through your ideas?
Yeah. Okay. Great. So now I start, properly my presentation.
Exactly.
So I move on. Can you see all the PowerPoint or not?
That is good. If you could maximize that window, that would be great.
Yes, I will maximize. Yes,
if you can't, that's okay too.
So this is the rooster. Okay, we have talked about that, and this is the title. You know already this. And I'm not going to explain the title because it's all about our presentation, my presentation and Justin's presentation. This is us. You can see us. From the University of Patras, and Justin from the University of Missouri. So here we are. Whose plan is this? Now, the idea is, of course, that both the Iliad and the Odyssey have plans behind them, okay? And we know that from the outset of the poems, okay? Because I'm going to talk about the Iliad and not about the Odyssey. The Odyssey is Justin's a cup of tea, so I leave it with him. Now, in the Iliad, this is very, very obvious that at some point, very early, as you can see, there is the plan of Zeus, okay? We used to call it Dios boule, okay, the will of Zeus, if you like, so we may translate it as the plan of Zeus, but in reality this is his own will. And in the proemion, that is the introduction of the Iliad, this is quite not clarified yet. We know that the Greek is Dios τελείωτο βουλή. Okay, so this is how it goes, so that the will of Zeus is accomplished. So we proceed, and somehow we realize that this plan is what Zeus had to promise to Thetis. And why we need that? We need that because the Iliad is a very, if you like, a very peculiar version of the Trojan War. Because Homer has decided to build everything around one single incident, and this is the wrath of Achilles. And Achilles got very angry, we know that, and this is common knowledge to everybody. And he gets very angry, he decides to, sort of give up fighting, but because his honor is compromised, he calls his mother, and this is very funny. I always say to my students that when Achilles is in trouble, he always calls his mother. Okay, and Thetis, the mother, goes to Olympus, to Zeus, to get a promise from Zeus. And the promise is, okay, and you can see now the text in English translation, and you can see that I use all my translations are from Lombardo. I like this translation. It's not very close to the Greek, but it's very lively translation. Anyway, Thetis to Zeus. Father Zeus, grant me this prayer. Honor my son, Timeson, doomed to die young, and yet dishonored by King Agamemnon. Agamemnon dishonored him, a Timesen, who stole his prize, a personal affront. Do justice by him, Lord of Olympus. Give the Trojans the upper hand until the Greeks grant my son the honor he deserves. The italics are mine because this is supposedly the promise to Thetis, which is thought to be the plan of Zeus, okay, for the Iliad. So Zeus has to give the upper hand to the Trojans to let them win until the Greeks realize the how important Achilles is, and they go and sort of ask him back. Okay, so Zeus confirms that, and this is not really how he confirms. He nods his head to Thetis, and this is a majestic scene in the Iliad, actually. And I know that Gregory Nash likes this picture very much of Zeus nodding his head, and how his beautiful hair actually are coming down his shoulders as he nods his head. Anyway, he says, yes, I'll do that, I'll grant that to your son. And he wakes up, or the narrative goes that he cannot even sleep, so he's turning in his bed and thinking how he would do that. And we have the narrative here, but Zeus lay awake in the dark, and this is already book 2, okay, thinking of how to honor Tymese, Achilles, and destroy Greeks by the shipload. So until now we realize that there is one plan for the Iliad, and the one plan for the Iliad is that Achilles needs his honor back, and this is what Zeus has to do. And how is he going to do it? We know that from, as I said very early in the narrative, that he gives the victory to the Trojans, and he sort of let the Achaeans actually get very bad in fighting. I don't know if the English doesn't come right now to my head. Anyway, so the Trojans are winning. The Greeks actually will at some point realize that they need Achilles back in the battle. Of course, the plan does not really go smoothly, even when Zeus actually initiates it and puts it in a sort of practice, okay? And we'll see that a bit later. But before moving to this issue, I would like to ask you, not ask you only, but to put on the table the various things or the various ideas that scholars so far have thought about this plan. Okay, is the plan only to honor Achilles, or the plan is to honor Achilles, to bring Achilles back to battle, because that happens differently, okay? Or when we talk about the plan of Zeus, we talk about the wider plan of Zeus, which actually includes also the fall of Troy, okay? And I have the title of a book here, which is called Divine Purpose and Heroic Response in Homer and Virgil, the political plan of Zeus. That's why I am putting it down, because this wider plan of Zeus that involves even the fall of Troy, it's called the political plan, so what he has in mind for Troy in general, and we can use this terminology to understand the wider picture of the whole thing. But what shall we do with that? I mean, are we confident or are we comfortable with which of the 3 questions that I have put here on my slide? We'll see. Okay, if the plan is to honor Achilles, as I have it on as my first question, we'll see it a bit later, that we'll see how it goes. But if the plan is to bring Achilles back to battle, okay, we have 2 instances where actually Patroclus' death, which is the only thing actually that will bring Achilles back to battle, okay, is retold in a sense in 2 passages in the Iliad, book 8 and book 15. We'll read them together. Now, the first one is book 8, Zeus actually talking to Hera, to his wife. Hector will not be absent from the war until Achilles has risen up from bedside his ship on the day when the fighting for Patroclus' dead body reaches its fever pitch by the ship's sterns. That is divinely decreed. Thesphaton St. So, we hear even from the book 8 that in order for Achilles to come back to battle, we have to wait for Patroclus to die. But that was not in the original plan. That was not included, if you like, in the promise that Zeus gave to Thetis. So we have a sort of deviation of the original plan. I'm just putting a question mark here, okay? I don't know. Perhaps even at the end of this presentation, we won't be very sure as to what this plan is and how it's constantly modified by the participants of this, if you like, action. Okay, now in the Iliad 15, you have another foretelling of the death of Patroclus. Okay. So, shall they, the Achaeans, flee in panic and fall dead among the hollow ships of Peleus' son Achilles, who will send forth his comrade Patroclus, whom illustrious Hector will kill with his spear before Ilium? After Patroclus, among them Sarpedon, my son. In wrath for Patroclus, Achilles will kill Hector. So, this is what Zeus is telling, and actually what he is telling is a sort of part of the narrative of the Iliad, okay? He says that Achilles will come back to battle, only when Patroclus will die, okay, and hands of Hector. And actually, not only that, but before Hector kills Patroclus, Patroclus will kill Sarpedon, who is the son of Zeus. So actually he tells us a series of killings, if you like, in battle, which are connected in a causal, if you like, continuity. Sarpedon first, that will provoke, if you like, the wrath of Zeus and Apollo. That will provoke Hector going back and attacking Patroclus, and Patroclus will fall under the hands of Hector. So it's a sort of series of killings in a sense, but it's a causal continuity, okay? Again, is this part of the plan? We have to have in mind all the time whether we are talking about the plan of Zeus. And the continuation of this passage is, from that time on, I shall cause the Trojans to be driven back from the ships until the Greeks capture steep Ilion through Athena's counsel. And as you can see now, we have moved from the bringing Achilles back to battle to what I have called the Zeus wider plan, which involves, of course, the fall of Troy. So these two passages actually are a bit perplexing. Okay, so a lot of scholars actually think that the plan of Zeus in the Iliad comprises also all these events, the death of Patroclus and the fall of Troy. Okay, so I threw on the table the doubts about the plan, and I'll go back to what Homer, I think, wants us to believe as for the will or the plan of Zeus. Now, I use this theoretical, if you like, tool or an interpretive tool, which I think makes sense. And the two passages I've just read for you could be, again, I put that on my slide. I personally, I buy these formulations that I have here, but perhaps you may doubt it, and we can discuss that when I finish, okay? That the will of Zeus might be the poet's metaphor for his determination of the plot, or in other words, a mechanism of the poet to enter into the story, and you have that in Wilson's Homer and the Will of Zeus. But again, I take you back to the narrative, and I will take you step by step to see how the plan, which was advertised in the Proemion, in book 1, the first book of the Iliad, is modified by Achilles. So the first, if you like, compromise of the plan is not even done by Zeus or by Homer, it's done by Achilles. So by book 9, what Achilles wanted to happen has already happened, okay? And what's that? The Greeks are in a very bad state and they need him back. So they sent an embassy to him and they asked him to come back. And of course, there is this beautiful company of his old friends, and of course, Achilles gave them a very warm hospitality. They eat and they drink together, and there is the moment now, the moment of the truth, that Achilles will actually say the final yes or no, and his friends, among which is Ajax and Odysseus, will go back to Agamemnon to say, to convey his answer. So Achilles tells them the following: now go and take back this message. I won't lift a finger in this bloody war until Priam's illustrious son Hector comes to the Myrmidon ships and huts, killing Greeks as he goes and torching the fleet. But when he comes to my hut and my black ship, I think Hector will stop for all his battle lust. Now we have, I think Hector will stop, and we don't know more than that, but we have had in book 8, which was it's a book prior to this book that we are now, that Hector will stop because Patroclus has gone back to battle. He got killed by Hector, and then Achilles will go back to revenge the death of his friend. But of course, this is not said here, and definitely this is not in Achilles' mind because he doesn't know anything about the death of his friend. Okay, we are talking about clearly and plainly about the plan of Zeus. And the first modification of the plan of Zeus, which was very, very clear at the beginning, it was just, I'll give the Trojans the upper hand, okay? Now, the modification of Achilles is, I don't care about that. I don't care whether the Achaeans get killed. You are now in my tent, okay, asking me to come back, but I won't come back. Although all the conditions that Achilles have said that are met by book 9, okay, the Achaeans need him, okay. But now Achilles does not want to go back, okay. So he wants to, in a sense, modify the original plan of Zeus. And what is this modification? I will go back only when the fire reaches my own tent and my own hut. Okay, so what I want to say is, by book 9, all the conditions set by Thetis and Achilles are met. So the original promise of Zeus to Thetis is done. Okay, that's it. I mean, everything is okay now, and the Greeks want Achilles back. But Achilles does not want to go back because the whole of the Iliad is built around an inactive Achilles. And Achilles is not going to go back in any other way because the fire actually reaches not his own tent and his own ships, but it's very near actually to his own tent and his own ships, and again does not want to go back. There is only one thing that will, take him back. You see that Achilles is inactive, and this is the poet's plan, which the poet's plan actually aims at mobilizing Achilles. And the only thing that can mobilize Achilles is Patroclus. Okay. Now, I have some ideas here, and I'm going to share them with you. My first idea, or one of my ideas about the book 16, which is the book that describes Patroclus' death, is that Patroclus actually assimilates the negative paradigm of Meleager. Now, I don't know whether you can recall that in book 9, when the embassy, the friends of Achilles, went to ask him to come back, Phoenix, who was his old, how you say that, the guy who proposed.
Kind of a caretaker, right? He's sort of a caretaker to him, a kind of father figure in a way.
Took care of him. How do you call that, Claudia?
Maybe a caretaker. Yeah, yes. But we understand. And in fact, our community is very familiar with this micro-narrative, so.
Yeah, a father figure, okay? A foster father, something like that. Anyway, he said to Achilles, my boy, don't do as Meleager did. And what Meleager did is that he was angry, of course, like the same, exactly like Achilles, and he didn't want to go to battle when his own people and his own country was under threat, and because he was angry with his mother, and anyway, it's a whole story there. I'm not going to go into details about this story. The thing is that Meleager looks like Achilles, or Achilles looks like Meleager. Okay, so Phoenix says, don't do as Meleager did, because he actually, at the end of the day, went back to battle, but he went back to battle when the fire reached his own chamber. And how did he go back to battle? Without gifts, without his honor being restored. So don't do that. Don't be like him, because if you go back to battle in a rush, if you like, because there is a fatal danger, then you will end up like Meleager, and this is a negative paradigm for you. Okay. So now let us think. We have the fire reaching actually the ships of the Achaeans. Okay. So at any moment, if you like, Achilles would need to go back, because he's the only one that he can save the ships of the Achaeans. Okay, but there is no time actually for his honor to be restored. Do you remember how many times I wrote you in the beginning, the atimasen, utimason? It's all about time. Okay, it's all about his honor. If he goes back in a hurry, okay, because he's forced to do that, his honor is not going to be restored. So you have the negative paradigm of Meleager, and there is only one chance that Achilles can avoid that. And the only chance to avoid being Meleager is to send his own dear friend Patroclus to take his place. Because Patroclus goes back to the battle, and actually he gets killed, okay? But he takes, if you like, the blame, or he could have taken the blame if somebody had to take the blame of going in a rush without honor. So Patroclus actually assimilates this negative paradigm, and on the other hand, resembles Agamemnon. That's quite peculiar, quite strange, because before he left to join the rest of the Achaeans, Achilles actually warned him and asked him to push the Trojans back from the ships, but not to push them further to Troy itself, because Troy is not meant to fall in your hands or under your hands. It's meant to fall, to fight. It's meant to be my own deed, if you like, heroic deed. Of course, all of us know that Troy fell not to Achilles, but to the ruse of Odysseus. But of course, this is not a knowledge that Achilles knew. But anyway, he says to his friend, don't do that, because if you do that, then you dishonor me more than I'm already dishonored. So who has dishonored actually Achilles in the Iliad? It was Agamemnon at the beginning of the Iliad. So Patroclus actually assimilates many roles, and he takes over, or he goes back to the battle actually in the shoes of Achilles, because Achilles, first of all, could not actually do what Meleager did, although he was nearly forced to do that. And second, if we try to see who was responsible for Patroclus' death, we may think that, in a sense, he dishonored his friend. Again, more, if you like. But anyway, let's see. My idea, or perhaps everybody's idea now around this table, is that Patroclus' death has nothing to do about the promise to Thetis, and has nothing to do with the fall of Troy. Because the Troy will fall without Patroclus and without Achilles, and we know that. And the promise to Thetis had not Patroclus in the picture, okay? But why do we need that? We need it because this is the only way that Achilles can get mobilized and go back to battle. Now, perhaps I confused more, or I I don't know, we started this presentation, or before I started my presentation, we had a clearer idea as to what the plan of Zeus was. And now I'm nearly at the end of my presentation, and I sort of try to say that it's quite clear that there is a plan of Zeus at the beginning of the Iliad, and this is only for our Iliad, okay? But this plan is a very narrow plan in a sense. It says, I will honor the Trojans. I will give the victory to the Trojans so that Achilles get his honor back. When actually this is going to happen somehow, because in book 9 that was already quite clear that Achilles was needed back to battle, and then the Achaeans went to ask him back. Achilles modified the plan, and he said, no, I'm not coming back. I will wait until this blah 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 happens, and this blah blah is until fire reaches my own ships. And actually fire reaches the ships of the Achaeans, but again Achilles is not going back. And for something, of course he didn't know that by that time, he waits for something which was so powerful that this inactivity of Achilles will be broken, okay? And the only powerful thing that will break the inactivity of Achilles was the death of his friend. So I'm just arguing that the death of Patroclus is part of the narratological plan of the poet and not part of Zeus's plan, nor the modification of the plan by Achilles. So if we think of these three different threads, if you like, of the narrative, okay, the one that prevails and is more powerful and around which the whole narrative is built is not Zeus's plan, nor Achilles' modification, but it's the narratological plan of the poet that involves the death of Patroclus, which was not, if you like, a part of the picture at the beginning. Okay, and I think that's it. I talked too much, and I'm so sorry about this. I will shut up now and let Justin carry on with his presentation, and I will be very happy to answer any questions you may have after after Justin finishes.
That is beautiful, Effie. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to hear Justin's comments. I just want to say, I think your idea that Patroclus is aligned with Agamemnon in terms of bringing dishonor to Achilles is very provocative. So I know we're going to have a lot to talk about. So Justin, do you want to keep our dialogue going? And
yeah, and let's see here. I'm gonna go ahead and go full screen here and make sure everything.
And Justin, while you're doing that, actually, I just want to let the community members know, and this is something we had a chance to talk about, Effie and Justin and I, that today's conversation will probably go over 12 o'clock, which is when we usually end. So if people need to leave at 12, that's okay. But whoever can stay is welcome to remain and continue our conversations. Okay.
Okay.
We're listening, and so on Google Plus. So I just want them to know as well that there'll be time, and we'll be taking discussion questions afterwards. Okay. So please go ahead, Justin.
Okay, great. Let's see. So I am hopefully now screen sharing, and then let me go ahead and go full screen with the presentation. And you can just let me know really quickly if you can see the slide. Yeah. Okay, great. Mm-hmm. So Effie, your presentation just gave me a lot to think about in terms of my own, and just really quickly before I begin, this idea of expiatory sacrifice and the provocation of wrath that came up early in your presentation that goes throughout, and how people who are agents of dishonoring someone and people who are recipients of honor fit into the plan. It's really making me, and you all will see this, it's really making me think about the fate of the Phaeacians, which has a lot to do with my presentation. So I'd like to just as a kind of a bridge between the two presentations, maybe that's something everyone can keep in mind is how agents of honor and dishonor and the provocation of wrath might be playing into modifications of divine plan in Homer, both in the Iliad and the Odyssey. So as you see, my title is Divine Plan and the Poetics of Suspense and Delay in Homer's Odyssey. And just really quickly, I'd like to say thank you again to the Center for Hellenic Studies, for the KICLOS project, and for Effie in particular, and the whole Hour 25 community for allowing me to be here. And it's been an excellent experience all around. It's very much enriched my own research, and it's going to have a formative effect on the way that I share my ideas in the future. So thank you to everyone. And as I mentioned, there will be a forthcoming paper, KICLOSAT, with the attributions and bibliography to most of the ideas that I present here today. And so I should just go ahead and say that I present are based very much in Professor Naj's work, Jim Marks, his book, his 2008 book on divine plans, Zeus and the Odyssey, has been kind of formative in my thinking about divine plans in the Odyssey, and my own research on arete and the Phaeacians is where all of this intersects. So you'll hear about all of those things as we move ahead. And the idea of suspense and delay is not a new idea in the way the Odyssey plays out, but I think the way that several items converge in the explicit terms of the plan of the poem and some more covert and implicit maneuvers going on by the poet renders a unique combination. So let me just start by proposing what the implicit plan of the poem might be. And I think it's embodied very well with this question, which it's a kind of a translation, my own translation of a very traditional question that Odysseus gets asked 5 times formulaically in the Odyssey, tis pothenais andron, which is who are you and where are you from, essentially. And in terms of the epic cycle, which at its largest represents a traditional background from which even the Iliad and the Odyssey are built and emerge, I think that question can come to mean, which Odysseus are you? Meaning, which version of this hero are we hearing about? So I'm going to immediately propose that as the implicit plan of the poem, because amid traditional multiforms and alternate versions of the hero's return, the Odyssey must distinguish and define Odysseus as a specific kind of pan-Hellenic hero. So from that context, I think the name of Odysseus is loaded, as I say here, because if you just mention Odysseus to a wide and varied audience, that audience may already have expectations or ideas of who Odysseus is. And as we'll see in the first passage that I present, the Odyssey is very careful to avoid the name of Odysseus, and I think that this is in part why. And this avoidance of name and the delayed recognitions that are very famous in the Odyssey that happen within the poem, I think are analogous to the audience's own expectation in response to this, and I put in scare quotes here, performance of the Odyssey. Because as you all well know, the Iliad and Odyssey are drawn from an oral poetic tradition. And so even if on paper, I think we're still dealing with something of a performance on paper. So again, my proposition to begin is that the implicit plan of the poem is to identify our version of the hero, which takes us to the explicit plan of the poem. And the Odyssey is often accused of starting in the middle of things, in media res, but I think it's fairly straightforward as to where the Odyssey, or where Odysseus has been and where he's headed. And so you'll see here in the first, I have excerpts of the first 21 lines, kind of the proem, the initial and the secondary proem of the poem. And I just want to highlight a few words here. In line 1, you notice that the poem begins with the word andra, which I find kind of curious, and other scholars have found curious, because this is a heroic poem about a very specific and well-known hero, Odysseus. But the poet is playing games, I think, with naming a specific person. And so he starts out with something of a blank slate. Tell me of the man who goes on these far journeys. He's been lots of places. Many were the cities he saw. He apparently has been to several cities that we don't necessarily hear about throughout the poem. And then you see in line 5, the operative feature of this character, this man, is a man who is struggling for his own life and the homecoming of his companions. And so this is our first instance of this word nostos. The poem is a return story. It is a poem designed to get Odysseus home. And that's perhaps the simplest explicit plan of the poem, is just to get this guy home. And for those of you familiar with the Indo-European return tale or the South Slavic return tale that Perry Lord and many others have studied, the operative agent often in a return tale is the wife of the hero. And so you'll see here in line 13, this one alone, and again his name is avoided, longing for his wife and his homecoming. And then and just to paraphrase, to move quickly, I'd like you to look at these last 3 lines that say, but all the gods pitied him except Poseidon. He remained relentlessly angry with godlike Odysseus until his return to his own country. So we learn a few things from the poem. We learn that Odysseus is well known. We learn that the poet is avoiding the actual naming of Odysseus, and we learn that he is designed to get home, but Poseidon's wrath is an impediment at the moment. And this is where an antagonism between Poseidon and Zeus and Athena becomes operative within the poem and the enactment of the plan. And you'll see here in this excerpt from Book 5, 29 through 42, if you look at the second line here on the page, which is line 30, this term absolute purpose, boule, the term boule, which we see in the very first few lines of the Iliad, which was very much the topic of Effie's introduction about divine plans. This term boule is invoked here, and Zeus has decided that his purpose, maybe apart from Poseidon's ideas, are the homecoming, or the nostos, of enduring Odysseus. And then he narrates essentially the announcement that Hermes is to make, and it involves, and you'll see here in bold print, his landfall on fertile Scheria, the island of the Phaeacians. And so if everything goes according to plan, Odysseus is going to move from Calypso's Isle, where his story begins, and he's going to land on the island of Scheria. And that's where a large portion of the middle of the poem takes place. And so even when Odysseus is telling his backstory, it's all centered on that very place. And it's the last place he goes before he actually ends up home in Ithaca. And you also see here that the terms of fate are also used in association with the plan of Zeus. It's an inevitability, both from the internal perspective of the poem and from the story pattern itself. People hearing this story would just simply know that the hero gets home. And specifically, you'll see he is designed to get home to his house, to his oikos, which is a highly resonant word in a Pan-Hellenic context. And so it's not just his stepping on the shore, but it's actually his reintegration into his household, which seems to be part of the plan. And this is in opposition to what Poseidon would like to have happen. And I'm using
That's
something
okay.
in the office, so
That's fine. Yeah, we understand.
we'll just let that ring for a second.
That's okay.
You can even answer it, and
So-
you can include it in the plans here.
Yeah, I must have said something, and somebody disagrees, and they're calling me
Exactly.
right now.
They have a problem with
yes.
the anger of Poseidon.
Yeah, stop talking. That was Poseidon, exactly.
I don't use those.
Wow, yeah, it is awfully rainy here today, but I guess that's Zeus's province. Poseidon returns from his visit to the Ethiopians, which is very much mirrored from Zeus's return from battle, or not from battle, to battle in book 15 of the Odyssey, or in the Iliad, where he sets his plan back straight. A passage that Effie mentioned. When Poseidon gets back, he's not very happy about this change in plan, and you'll see here. He says, "For shame, surely the gods have rashly changed." And the verb here is metabuleo, which is, as you see here, has the term boule in it, and a meta is to change something, or can mean to change something. And so the term used for change in plan actually invokes this idea of divine plan, which I find to be very interesting. And he sees that the gods have rashly changed their intentions. About Odysseus while I was away with the Ethiopians, or in the Ethiopian land, and he nears the Phaeacian country, where it is appointed, again kind of fated, that he shall escape this great trial of misery that now is his. And we learn from the proem too, Odysseus is a suffering hero, and so not only is he going to get home, but he's going to escape his troubles. And that's a problem for Poseidon, who finally says in this last line, "But I think I can still give him a good full portion of trouble." So we have this threat, this idea that the plan is being enacted, but there still maybe is trouble waiting. So the implications of this, I think, are that the telos, or the end point of the poem, is a determined fact. It's the homecoming of Odysseus. But once actually home, for those familiar with the Odyssey, we learn that it is far from an end to the story. Suspense, delay, danger, uncertainty, everyone knows that's part of the entire Ithacan sequence until the resolution of the poem. And the same is true on Scheria, but it's in Odysseus' own terms. He narrates his own precarious unfolding of events in his prior adventures, and the poet, too, uses diction to indicate that the Phaeacians may or may not be as friendly as they appear. So the suspense and delay and danger that are well known on Ithaca, I think, are mirrored in the Phaeacian episode, and it's at this moment when we add all of this up and we realize that homecoming and recognition in particular become enmeshed, and they're both strategically delayed. If an actual stepping on the shore does not result in the telos at the poem, then there's something else about the homecoming that enacts the plan, so to speak. And I think that has everything to do with recognition. And the recognition, and I think this is the important proposition to add, is that it is both for the internal audience and the external audience. You have the internal audience's uncertainty of who Odysseus is probably similar to a traditional audience who is receiving this story maybe for the first time, a specific version of the Odyssey. An audience who knows aspects of the tale, they know how it's going to end, they may have even heard alternate versions or multiforms of this tale, but they're listening very intently to how it's going to turn out. And so I think that recognition is for the internal and the external audience. On this note, Queen Arete embodies. She's one of a few characters in the epic where all of this uncertainty about the identity of Odysseus becomes focalized. On multiple occasions, Arete's role in Odysseus' homecoming is highlighted. Both Nausicaa and Athena say, "Hey, Odysseus, go straight to the queen, walk right past Alcinous, go past the king." Athena even makes him invisible so that he is guaranteed to make it up to her knees, and he beseeches her in a not unsimilar way as Thetis beseeches Zeus in the Iliad. So we are led to believe that Arete is going to play an operative role in homecoming, which we know is going to happen, but we're not quite sure how it's going to happen. And this is very consistent with the traditional role we would expect from Penelope as a determinant of the tale. If all eyes are on Penelope when he gets to Ithaca as to how Penelope will receive Odysseus and how the tale is going to unfold, at least by the norms of the traditional return tale, I think Arete mirrors that function. And so she interrogates Odysseus. She asks him this question, "Who are you?" And I think that's it's a very charged moment in the epic, because it's Arete's question, but it's also a question for the audience. What kind of hero are you? Which Odysseus are you? Are you that guy from Crete, or are you someone else? And where are you headed? And so Odysseus seemingly evades her interrogation until, and this is part of my research that is more fully explicated in the forthcoming paper. She stays silent, she disappears, but she comes back in in book 11, and it's after Odysseus has narrated this very beautiful and dense and complicated catalog of heroines after seeing his mother in the underworld. And he says, I can't go on with my story. He delays his own story, and he says, I can't go on anymore. I think I'm just going to have to stop here. And Arete immediately interrupts him and summons this announcement to the Phaeacian court and says, this man is my Xenos. And for those of you familiar with this term, Xenia or Xenos, it means hospitality, and it is one of, if not the operative theme of the entire Odyssey. So here at this moment, Odysseus is being established as a person who embodies a specific kind of Xenia. And I think that very near the center point of the poem, this encounter helps Odysseus become the type of hero who he needs to become before he returns to Ithaca. We're still not done, though. His homecoming it's not as if this moment happens and he's magically whisked away to Ithaca. He still has to get there. He still has to navigate the journey, and the poet plays with us a little bit. For those who have been listening to the Odyssey up to this point, you may have remembered in Book 8, just after Alcinous requests for Odysseus' name, and remember how the poet avoids the name of Odysseus. He almost casually mentions an old prophecy. He says, yeah, this one time I heard a prophecy from my father, Nausithous, who said it and told me, and here's the bold-faced print, how Poseidon would yet be angry with us because we are convoy without hurt to all men. So in other words, we're going to give painless conveyance to strangers who show up on our island. And as we know, Poseidon is quite angry with Odysseus and would like him to experience quite a bit of pain. And the passage goes on. He said that one day, as a well-made ship of the Phaeacian men came back from a convoy on the misty face of the water, he would stun it and pile a great mountain over our city to hide it. So the old man spoke, and the god might either bring it to pass, or it might be left undone, as the god's heart pleases. I should mention here, Professor Naj has done and is doing quite a bit of work on this passage, and it's such a great moment of indeterminacy in the epic, where the poet lets us know this could go either way, and it's part of this tactic of suspense and delay. We know Odysseus is going to get home, but all of these other uncertainties present themselves in what otherwise seems to be a straightforward plan. And so some questions arise. If Poseidon wants pain for Odysseus, what happens to the Phaeacians when they actually convey him without pain? And if Arete has actually affected Odysseus' Xenos, if she's played the role that she seems to have played, is it possible that she could draw down the curse on her people? So, which raises kind of ethical, theodistical questions of how can the Phaeacians be punished for acting according to divine plan? This is what Zeus wants, right? Shouldn't everyone be happy with this? Well, not everyone is. In Book 13, or in Book 13 of the Odyssey, sorry, I left out the book there, but you have the line numbers. There is this conversation between Poseidon and Zeus. Once Poseidon realizes that the Phaeacians have in fact conveyed Odysseus and given him honor, Poseidon feels dishonored. He demands justice, and then Zeus says, we don't want this, so do as you please. And at this moment, the audience is maybe on their toes. This might be the moment that we're going to learn.
Excuse me, Justin.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Can you just pause for 1 second? I think we're having some audio difficulties. Are other people experiencing that as well? No? Is it just me? Okay, great. Helen?
Okay.
Okay. Oh, Effie? Okay, then just keep going.
No,
Great.
I'm fine. The sound is crystal clear. It's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Sorry about that. It's just because we were recording, I don't want to miss anything. So.
Sure. Okay, great. And so Zeus says to Poseidon, "Do as you please," and then Poseidon says, I'd like to cast this mountain on their city. I'd like to annihilate them. But what do you think?" Which is a very different Poseidon than we hear in the Iliad when Zeus returns and kind of reinstates the plan in Book 15 of the Iliad. And Poseidon very begrudgingly allows Zeus to reestablish the plan and reminds him that that he's he thinks that, I'll let this slide this one time, but I'm just as powerful as you, Zeus. But so here we see a very different kind of deferral, and I think it is part and parcel of the Odyssey's strategy of switching things up a little bit in terms of divine plans and playing with your expectations. And so in lines 154 through 157, Zeus says, turn their ship to, this is his recommendation, turn their ship to stone, and then we get this very troubling variant in the manuscript tradition. And we have two readings, and the Koine, or the Vulgate reading, is, and cover their city with a big mountain, as stated in the prophecy. But there's also another reading that says, or do not cover their city with a big mountain. And this seems to be quite a significant alternative. I won't go into this now, and it can be a part of our discussion, but what happens is, regardless of the reading we adopt, and the poem has already given us this sense of uncertainty as to what's going to happen to the Phaeacians, even without the variation. Poseidon lithifies the ship, he turns it to stone, as he said, and then he disappears from the epic, literally leaving this big mountain suspended, or not literally, metaphorically leaving it over the Phaeacians. And even in line 187, the whole Phaeacian episode ends kind of shockingly mid-line, and this is an observation by Professor Nas and John Perodato, and it's a really bracing moment that suddenly the Phaeacian episode is just over, and Odysseus is awaking from sleep and he's home. So something has worked. He's back home, but we're left with lots of questions. And so what can we come to out of all of this? And I think that questions concerning the route or path to the outcome, or the telos, are raised throughout this whole epic. And we do know that Odysseus will arrive home, but we do not know if the Phaeacians are going to be destroyed, either in part or in full. And most importantly, in either scenario, who will recount the memory of the Phaeacians? Because they're either shut off from the world or they're destroyed. And so it becomes incumbent on either Odysseus or the poet to remember them. And I think that the poet has already given us the resolution to these questions. Because if Odysseus fails to recount the Phaeacians, and Queen Arete especially, there is this threat that they'll be annihilated from memory. And there is no mention of Arete in Odysseus's very straightforward recapitulation of his adventures to Penelope after she recognizes him in Odyssey 23. And so this raises again the question, if the queen is so important, then why is she absent? Well, I think the poet has already retrospectively given her a place of honor in the telling of the apologue. In the expression of her high honors, and in the formulaic language and actions given to her. So Odysseus's failure, which is subtly his poetic failure to fully memorialize his own heroic outcome, becomes the poet's success. And if divine resolution is left open, the poet retains closure and control of the episode. So why does Poseidon leave and never return? Well, because the poet has the power to tear him from the poem. So in all, Nostos is fated, but the pathway is not. And Odysseus' journey, as controlled by the poet, defines him. And we'll eventually see that Penelope and Laertes' recognition signal the completion of this process. And it's really only once this process of recognition as Nostos is completed can we reflect on the uncertainties that have been raised throughout the epic, and the audience is left to interpret what actually happened. So that closes my presentation. Hopefully, it raises some questions, because I have many myself. Speaking of suspense and uncertainty, I'm often uncertain of many of these conclusions. So I'd love to hear what everyone has to say about this.
Wow, that was incredibly beautiful. Thank you so much. So I think you both have highlighted the different ways that the poet or the narrator of or the singer of tales has power, either aligned with or even over the plan. Yeah. And so that's why I love that title, Whose Plan Is It? So, all right, so now I'm going to turn it over to our community members and to the people in the audience. to ask you what has come up for you with these beautiful, beautiful presentations. So anyone here? Bill, great.
Thank you both for putting so much work into your presentations. Really, really good stuff and good things to think about. If we can start with Iffy, I really liked your observation that Zeus predicts what's going to happen to Patroclus, but doesn't necessarily say he's responsible. You know, in the reference you listed, 1561, he's talking about what's going to happen, but Zeus doesn't say, "I shall cause," which he says he'll cause the Achaeans to win on the battlefield. He doesn't say he's going to cause any of this till 69. So anyway, I like that nice summary there. Here's my question to you. Do you think that the will of Achilles is stronger than the will of Zeus?
I love your question. Actually, Bill, I think I've read also the comments that you have posted already or something. It was you, wasn't it, that you did all the meetings and everything? Hi, I'm so glad that you participate. I love your question. To be honest, and I'll tell you very, very clearly and plainly what I think. I think Achilles' plan is stronger or more powerful than Zeus's plan, and the poet Homer's plan is more powerful than all of them. So in a sense, I think in a sort of escalating way, you have Zeus who has a sort of an idea, if you like. He's sort of forced, in a sense, to promise something to Thetis. He really believes in that, honestly, because next day or next month, in the same night that he doesn't sleep and he cannot sleep, and he's sort of thinking of how he will enforce his plan. This thing, which is very interesting, yet I didn't have time to mention at all, and this is the narratology of the whole of the Iliad, is that he tries to enforce his plan and it never works. Never. From the very first time that Zeus tries to enforce it and say, okay, now the Achaeans will, the Trojans will win and the Achaeans will sort of suffer, you have all the time the overturning of this plan, okay? Something happens all the time and the plan goes to, I don't know where, to pot. The plan goes astray completely. And then he has to go back to the action and either, sort of say to the rest of the gods, oh, stop interfering because you are messing up with my plan, and then tries to control the mortals, but this is not very easy at all, I can tell you, because Achilles indeed modifies Zeus's plan, and he says, no, honoring me is not enough, it's not good enough. I will go back only if this happens, and that was not part of the original plan, and it's not part of Zeus's plan. And how does Homer solve the whole thing? How does Homer solve the thing in a sense that how does he build up his narrative? He doesn't actually buy any of the plans, and he constructs his own narratological plan, which is there is just one thing that will bring Achilles back, and bringing back Achilles actually is the Iliad, because the Iliad is Achilles' anger, Achilles not fighting. How would we get this guy back to battle? Just one thing.
Very good.
Just one. And that's Patroclus. Patroclus, because he loves Patroclus, okay? That's it. This is what I think, Bill, honestly. And I don't know whether you buy it or not, but I don't know. Justin, what do you think?
Oh, well, I wonder, and you can comment on this more intelligibly at the moment, but if the poem starts with Manon, with wrath, and if this wrath is implicated in this plan that is carried out and suspended and challenged throughout the poem, I think it's interesting that it's finally the relenting of wrath, which is essentially a relenting of the plan, that finally resolves everything. So I'm wondering if the poet is making his characters give up, and if in a way that signals to the audience that neither Zeus nor Achilles are kind of in control of an outcome at this moment, or at least the one that was made operative at the beginning of the poem. So that's I like thinking of it in terms of negative space, you know, in terms of what is given up and how do things evaporate. And so I think the manus does evaporate eventually in the poem.
I think so many people that haven't actually read the Iliad miss that point, that it's about the manus of Achilles. And once there's no manus, that's the end of the story. It's not about the fall of Troy. It's about this one man's anger, and when that's done, okay, story's over.
Yeah. And may I say something? May I say something? The relent of the anger, okay, Achilles is giving up his anger in book 19, okay? But this is the part of the anger against the Achaeans and against Agamemnon. A whole new set of, a whole new anger actually starts up again, and this time is against Hector, okay? So, to my mind, there is a second cycle within the Iliad. The first one, which is in a sense is closing up, and what the poet said at the beginning of the Iliad actually ends in book 19. And then you have another sort of story, and that sort of story, in a sense, ends with the eleos, the compassion of Achilles. I told you once when we were chatting on Skype, the compassion of Achilles towards Priam. Yeah. So you have two sort of angers in the Iliad, okay? The one against the Achaeans, Agamemnon and the Achaeans, the second against Hector, and that anger against Hector is very, very strong and very, how can I say, paraklinous, no idea what this word, I can only find the word in Greek. It violates actually the set of values of the period, because he actually again, what does he do in the body of Hector? He
he drags it, he abuses it.
Yes, drags, but abuse. But there is a better word for that, Justin. The terminology.
He defiles it.
He defiles it. Yeah, he defiles it. But this is very strong. Okay, in a sense, it's so strong that the gods actually say, okay, we cannot take it any longer. And this is another sort of story within the story, and that ends with the compassion scene of Priam and Achilles. So I think, above all, Bill, and I truly liked your question, is the poet. It's the poet. He manipulates both his Zeus and his Achilles.
Well,
that's it. This is how I see it, actually. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I mean, one of the things it makes me think about too, though, and I know Sarah has a comment, it's just the movement from anger to friendship, right, that takes place over the course of it. Really, this is something about...
Iliad has written, actually, his book ends with the Philotes.
Exactly.
Okay, how the anger dissolves into Philotes, into friendship. Yes.
Exactly. So Sarah, please go.
Yes, well, I love those sort of two stories of anger and those two different trajectories. But you were also talking about how Achilles sort of changes the plan, and then it's that point at which the fire reaches the ships. Doesn't quite reach his ship because he sends Patroclus out to stop it. But I did notice that in book 16, around about line 112. The poet again addresses the muse, just as the poet addresses the muse at the beginning of the poem. So it's like this is the beginning of Achilles' second plan, if you like.
That's right. Right. Yes. Yes. I love that. Yes, it's the invocation of the muse again, and that's so strange because it's, as you said, it's like starting all over again. Yeah.
Wow. So sort of recharging it, right?
Yes, yeah, it's very important. That moment is so important that the fire reaches the ships of the Achaeans. That again, you invoke the muse to to verify what you're saying, but it's also very important. And I like also Sarah's observation, which is a very right observation, that actually the fire does not reach Achilles' ships. It's the Achaeans' ships. Yes. there is a room there, a narratological space. I always like when Homer does that. He leaves a room, a free room to manipulate his narrative. So it's not Achilles' ships, but it's going near his ships. But that particular narratological free space, he's free to fill it up the way he wants, and he fills it up with Patroclus going to battle, which is the major, actually, theme, the major thing in the Iliad. Mm. It's around this death that everything falls into place.
So we actually have some questions on our Q&A board. If we could take a couple of those now. So Janet Oslak, a very cherished member of our community, has two questions. The first is, and I'm going to click on them so that they get selected. How does the will of the poet fit into the oral tradition? Oh. So that's a big question. But maybe we could just talk about that for a minute, because your presentations both raised this very important idea. I mean, we're not going to solve that in the next, 10 or 15 minutes, but so very briefly, what can we say about that?
Take over now.
Yeah, well, what a question.
Yeah.
And that can be addressed so many different ways, and you can address it from the Homeric tradition or from a comparative tradition. But I think that to answer the how part of that question, I think the answer is very carefully, because any traditional poet is, I don't want to use the word bound, because that implies restriction or artistic restriction, but is willingly adheres to traditional paradigms, from the smallest unit of a single word up through an entire story pattern. So there's a template of sorts which is expected to be used, but at the same time, the poet, in order to demonstrate artistry and meaning and beauty and all the things that attract us to something like the Iliad or the Odyssey, the poet also has to do something unique, something innovative. So there's this real tension between tradition and innovation for any traditional poet in choosing how to render a tale, especially if it's one that you've heard a million times. And I think that I often think of jazz as a paradigm for this. And for those of you who saw Graham Bird in the last hour 25 discussion, dealt with this, but if performers and audiences have heard the song Autumn Leaves a million times, it still doesn't mean that performers or group of performers can't both adhere to the tradition and also do something unique and innovative. So that's where I'll start and leave that for a moment, is that there is a delicate line between tradition and innovation that really sorts good poets from bad poets. And you hear in the South Slavic tradition, you'll hear audiences say, "Oh, this guy's great. We love his poem." And that other guy, he told pretty much the same story, but it just wasn't as good. And we don't have access to that really in the Homeric tradition, because it seems that time has sorted the preference of the Panhellenic Greeks. But if only, right? So.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's really interesting, and I'm grateful that you referenced Graham Bird's conversation. I think that would be a very helpful conversation for people to follow up on. If you missed it, I would encourage you to follow a link. We can share that on the Hour 25 website and the CHS website. And just this idea of innovation, as it's not his whole point was, it's not about just making things up randomly, right? It's about working with the beautiful pieces of this refined tradition to tell the tale in the most appropriate way for the moment of performance, right? So it's a different kind of idea, I think, for us. When we think about innovation, we think something totally out of the box, something totally new. No one's ever thought of it.
Yeah, and I think too. I've often thought of the metaphor of in terms of how those changes and innovations take place. I think we also have to be very careful in thinking about how quickly or nimbly a traditional poet can maneuver as well. And it might not be big dramatic shifts or turns, and then a ship came from the sky and took Odysseus to the heavens. It's this is not exactly happening. It's often in the very small details and the subtle shifts, and that's a careful reading of a whole performance, or a careful hearing of a whole performance, is where you start to subtly discern echoes and hints at these maneuvers. You know, it's a big ship, and it's hard to steer quickly.
Well, we've been thinking a lot about ships, actually, and so I hope at some point we should probably close out at 12:30. Maybe we could talk a little bit about the ship that you talk about, Justin, in your talk, which is so interesting. But I want to see if anyone else here in the room has a question. Maybe Helen or Ali. Yeah.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Now, I was just wondering if this is why we love so much Homer, because we do not only see gods in actions, or gods, the will of gods, but we also see men, and it shows only, men acting foolishly or wisely, and they have some kind of free will too. So I was just wondering if the author doesn't also want to show that men have a way of doing their things too and acting freely. It's not only about the plans of gods. I was just wondering if it's also why we love so much Homer, because it shows men in action too.
If I may, I have.
That's my cup of tea. Go ahead, Justin. But I will need to say a couple of words.
I mean, I think yes. I think absolutely is.
I love
if for those, I mean, there is a great humanity in the epics, and I think it has very much to do with the way we watch real people make hard decisions. And I'm maybe a little too deterministic about this, because I do tend to think the poet is very much in control of the narrative and gives the audience enough playful suggestion to let us know where things are headed. But at the same time, the poet allows space, allows even as determined as the plan, literally the poetic compositional plan might be, the poet allows space for characters to do things and make mistakes and deal with them. It's with Odysseus. I mean, I really feel like every time he's asked who he is, the audience is on their toes and just waiting for him to say the right or the wrong thing, and he almost tells Eumaeus the wrong story about his identity, and Eumaeus says, "No, try again," and he tells another tale, and then Eumaeus says, "Yeah, I like that one. I like who you are now," and so I think that we are drawn to those potential. Yeah. So we're attracted to that. Yeah.
Can I just say something, Claudia? Do I have?
Please. Yeah.
Okay, because I love what Helen said. Thank you so much for this beautiful remark, because it's very close to my heart. I think Homer, and this is my honest belief, that Homer actually cares about the mortals, and this is what I think. Okay, and many times when I teach Homer, I tell my students the following examples. Okay, for example, take love. Everybody loves, love scenes. He's interested in how a poet would describe love. Okay, and take the example of the Iliad. You have a beautiful, beautiful scene between two people who are in love, in a sense, and they sort of show tenderness and show what really love is. And of course, I'm talking about Hector and Andromache. Okay, and this is the departing scene of Hector. But this part of the narrative is so deep and profound in sentiments that you cannot just, you cannot just miss it or, go very soft about it. Okay, it's very profound. And you go and you see another love scene, in a sense, which is when Zeus and Hera make love. Okay, and this is part of a deception plan, because Hera wants to take Zeus away from the battle, because that moment was, the Achaeans were really in a very bad shape, and you had all the preparation of Hera, beautifying herself in order to seduce Zeus and all that, and they indeed make love, okay, and Hera, 1 minute before actually going to bed, in a sense, of course, it's not bed, it's this beautiful meadow with all these flowers and all that. 1 minute before she actually goes to bed with Zeus, says, I hate this guy. I do that only because I want to deceive him. And what I say to my students is, if you want to see anything which is profound, and as Justin said, hard decisions, really hard decisions. When Hector actually encounters Achilles, he really feels fear. He runs around Troy for 3 times, okay? He's a coward. Sometimes people say to me, students say to me, but he's a coward. He's not a coward, he's a human being. Of course human beings are afraid. And the great heroism is when they actually face their fears and they act against that. So whenever you need something profound, you find it on the mortal's side, in the mortal's world. The gods are there actually, I wouldn't say as puppets, because this is far-fetched and people will crucify me, actually scholars will crucify me, but they complement the mortal's world, and they are not profound, they are shallow, honestly. Okay, so this is my belief, and Helen, I truly believe that this is why we like Homer so much, because there is this humanity as a kernel of his poetry. And sorry, I talked again too much, but this is what I believe, and your question, your remark actually gave me the chance to say that. Sorry.
No, that was incredibly moving, actually. Any follow-up thoughts to that? Sarah? Sarah's, yeah. I mean, that's an incredibly beautiful conversation, right? That's one of the things that's so great about this, which is that we can talk about those moments and share those moments about what it's really like to, experience the poetry and to have it matter to our lives, our intellectual lives, our emotional lives. So it's a gift to be able to talk with you all. How about Marietta? We'd love to hear from you if you have anything to share, and your friend. If not, that's okay too. Okay, there's no pressure. We could continue this conversation online, or yeah.
No, there's no pressure. Hello from us.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Very nice conversation.
Yeah. And now you're a guest, and you're always welcome.
Shall we make our question?
We have something in mind. We are thinking that since we have a poet, a master manipulator, he's manipulating Homer manipulates Zeus, manipulates mortals, immortals. Would we say maybe that the death of Patroclus
has nothing to
do with the fact that we don't see then the death and the funeral
of the hugest hero, Achilles.
Of Achilles in Iliad. So is that the way to show a really magnificent funeral, like the one that Achilles will have?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this a chance to say that did the poet have this on his mind? Like us to say how it would be the death of a huge hero. And here we have Patroclus instead of Achilles, because he doesn't die of Iliad.
Yeah, we're seeing lots of nodding heads.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're, you may be familiar with.
The sound does come up.
Oh.
The sound is really bad.
Yes,
sorry.
It's bad.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
No, it's bad.
Okay. If you're familiar with Jonathan Burgess' book on it's 2009 on the death and afterlife of Achilles. He makes a very cogent argument, and there are even tables in the back of the book that very cleverly demonstrate the way that the Iliad poet essentially narrates the death of Achilles without actually narrating the death of Achilles, and Patroclus is at the center of that, and you know, and as evidence, you know, why does Thetis show up to mourn Patroclus? Because shouldn't she be mourning her own son? You know, so that's to answer again the question of how does an oral poet deal with tradition? Well, you deal with it by hint and suggestion and not manipulating, but leveraging what the audience already knows, and you can tell a story without actually telling it just by nodding to it.
Because that's the power of an oral tradition, right? Everything is resonating in so many directions. It's a network and a web. I mean, you ping one little thread and everything's vibrating.
Everything lights up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So you know, it's 12:35. This has been so beautiful. I wish we could keep going, but I know people. We still have 17 viewers online who are listening and watching. I wish we could talk to you all. 18 now. So here's the thing. Justin and Effie have been so generous. They've offered to continue the conversation on the Hour 25 website. So we can continue our conversation there. We're not done. So hold your questions and comments. Put them there, bring them there. We'll all continue to talk about it together, and maybe we can come back and have another follow-up conversation live at some point. Because there's so many things you brought up. I mean, I couldn't even list them all. So we need to sign off because people are at work. Otherwise, I would list them. But so we're going to get to that ship, and the fact that Poseidon disappears afterwards. I'm heartbroken that we didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
As would have been the audience.
Okay, so thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you all the best, and I hope you all will come back again.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us, by the way. Thank you very much, everybody. And I like, you know, Bill's and Helen's and Sarah's question. They were really very up to the point. Thank you ever so much for coming and joining us.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone.
Okay.